Hi, happy Tuesday, besties and bosses. I'm just gonna make sure this is pulling up in my as well. How are you all doing? It's so weird. It looks like it's about to rain outside. So in the last 20 minutes, my office has gone from like super bright to it almost looks black outside and super dark. So I feel like I'm sitting in the dark all of a sudden. I'm gonna see if I can pull this up, but I would love to hear how y'all are doing. I feel like I am how am I feel like I don't know. I want to like acknowledge this before we dive into today's live stream. I feel like I have been in such a dichotomous place all week ever since the terrorism, the brutal attacks in Israel, and just feeling so much for those of you who are either personally affected, who live there, who have family and friends there, and just my heart breaks for you. And also wanting to acknowledge, of course, that I also feel deeply for the people of Palestine who have been suffering, but my heart has just been broken. And then also finding that place in between where we're still working and serving clients, and I live in the US and everything is quite safe here. And I just had a beautiful weekend with my husband celebrating our anniversary. So very much vacillating between the two, but I did want to take a moment before we dived in today just to acknowledge. I think that's present for all of us, and I know some people in this group either are literally living in Israel, and I can only imagine the extreme horror and terrifying situation you're in. I just my heart goes out to you, but also for those of you who have family and friends affected, and just wanted to acknowledge that before we dive in, because I think that's just so present, especially for a community like this where I know so many of us are very global. So wanting to speak to that. I wish there was something more I could do, but acknowledge that. But my heart is with all of you. Okay, let me collect myself because now I'm a little off here. Let me collect myself. And hey, Claire, nice to have you. We were just talking about this. Let's now recenter and talk about what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about the exact content strategy shifts I'm making and suggesting to my clients so we don't sound like ChatGPT. Whether or not you're using AI, whether or not you're using ChatGPT is not really the point here, but this is, I think, a relevant conversation for all of us in terms of what's working in content and what shifts we want to be mindful of with our strategy in 2023. I think with ChatGPT and with AI just being so much more a part of our landscape, things have just shifted and changed. And I think if we're not aware of that, it can be really frustrating when you're creating content. You're like, why is this not landing the way it did last year? Why is this not working the way it used to work? What's going on here? I know I wrote a post about this, I think this week. I wrote a post about this. Here's actually what's very funny. I wrote a post sharing that Jennifer says it's heartbreaking and beyond awful what is happening. It is absolutely beyond. I watched probably some videos I shouldn't have, but both wanted to make sure I was aware yesterday. And it's I know I'm ping-ponging back and forth between the topics, but it just feels so important that we're all aware and conscious, especially because not all of us are affected directly. It's absolutely horrific and brutal. So yes, it is, and just really just wanting to acknowledge that. This feels like I feel a little like I'm jumping between two very vastly different topics here. So thank you for all bearing with me trying to navigate this as a very much a human in the middle of this. But with content, if we bring us back to that focus, I wrote a post earlier that went out this week, and it's a little funny because I wrote a post about how the beginning of the year in January, I really started seeing my reach with my content go down drastically, and I couldn't figure out why. And I've been digging in and studying my content and really playing with it since, and as well as with clients. And we've seen it between, I don't know exactly what the numbers were because I put it in a post. I asked ChatGPT to do the math, but we've seen between a 1,000 and 2,000% increase in reach on my post. The reason I say it's funny is that particular post, I think because of the graphic we used, was actually a very low reach post. So the irony is not lost on me. But on average, we've seen a really big increase in reach, in engagement, and part of that is we've been really intentional with testing different things to play with. So that's why I want to bring this here, because I think if we're not aware things have changed. I know when it happened in January, if I hadn't been thinking about like, well, why is that happening? And how are things like ChatGPT becoming available to people affecting content and reach? And of course, algorithms are changing. I think it can feel very frustrating, and I think it can just feel like, is my content stuck? Did my content stop working? Like, what's going on here? So that's the conversation we're going to have today. None of your content sucks. All of you create brilliant content. But I am going to chat a little bit about some very strategic changes and comments I'm making on my clients' content. Because one of the things, if you're on my email list, one of the things I was talking about is I think ChatGPT and AI is amazing. I'm like fascinated by it to the degree that I engage with ChatGPT like it's a person. I literally think it. You'll have to tell me if you do that as well. But I think the thing we want to remember is while it's so smart and it sometimes feels like you're talking to a person, I can absolutely tell the difference between content that is from ChatGPT and content that's not from ChatGPT. And this is not a conversation to say don't use ChatGPT for your content, but our goal is to understand how to not have your content sound like ChatGPT wrote it, even if it did. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit because I think there are various reasons for why content reach has gone down this year. There's various reasons for why the algorithm has changed, right? There's a lot at play, but I do think because we now have, not only is it more crowded in the online space, as we've talked about so much this year, but with AI coming to play and with our industry having a bit of a lack of trust and being oversaturated, I think a lot of people are wondering, are you who you say you are? And so then when we're writing content and it sounds like it came from AI, right? What is that telling people's brains, consciously or subconsciously? It's telling people this person isn't who they say they are. This isn't written by a robot. This wasn't them. People so badly, I think, are craving to get to know the you on the other side of a piece of content. And I think that's always been true, but I think never has that been more true and made a bigger difference in terms of reach, engagement, and conversions with content than with the introduction of AI and the sort of mass use of it in our space. And I think just in conjunction then with algorithm changes and reach going down, and I don't know if ad costs are actually going up, but with the saturation in our space and the lack of trust in our space, right? I think all of that together makes for a reason that this is even more prevalent for all of us to pay attention to. Jennifer says 100%. Thank it every time it helps and gives me info. Claire says I do too, and ChatGPT loves it. Haha, it's so funny. It has such a good sense of humor, don't you? Like I sometimes ask it to tell me a joke, or I don't know. I think it's a little creepy, y'all. Like it in like the best way possible, but sometimes I'm like talking to this like it's a person, and it's responding to me like it's a person. It is a little mind bending. So, but because of that, right? We have to think if we're all having this experience with that. And we also all want to work, we're also all sort of wondering on the online space, is so-and-so really who they say they are? Are they like lying about their results? Are they lying about their experience? Or are they lying about what's in their program, right? We've had a lot of those question marks. And there's been a blow up in our space of more people, of course, than when a post sounds a little bit like ChatGPT wrote it. And I'm curious by all of you, do you ever read something you're like, I'm pretty sure that's a ChatGPT post, right? It just has you sort of lose the connection point a little bit. And it's not like you're like, oh, this person sucks and I don't like them. It just doesn't have the same connection and draw you in the same way. And again, this does not mean don't use ChatGPT for content, but this is really changing up the notes I've been giving my clients, because I read, I was editing one of my clients' sales emails recently, and one of my literal thoughts when I read this was, wow, this is such a technically solid sales email, and we have to change all of this because it's not going to land with her audience, because it sounds like ChatGPT wrote it, not like she wrote it, and it's not in her voice, and there's just going to be a disconnect, even though it was technically a perfect email. And that's the piece I want us to dig into a little bit. Claire says you really can't tell if someone is 100% ChatGPT and not got the person's tone and voice and personalization. It loses trust straight away. It is exactly that piece. So we're going to dig into that a little bit. And the number one note I've been giving my clients and paying attention to myself, I'm going to chat about how I think about using AI support in my business. I'm going to chat about my prediction for the type of content that I think is going to blow up this year and what I think will blow up your business. And then we're just going to talk a little bit about a reminder that's not ChatGPT specific, but in terms of the type of content that actually brings in clients and business, because I think that's relevant. Oh, and I forgot to say this. If you leave me a comment, we're giving away a copy of my content course, Content That Stands Out and Sells. Wow, I really forgot that today. So just leave me, anyone who's already commented, if you leave me a comment on this, we will pick winners, and we'll give that away to someone. It's a really good, I've literally had people use it and tell me they've made a 10K month off of implementing that. it's an oldie, but it's all more like content foundational principles, and I think it's a pretty good one. Okay, so let me dig in, because otherwise I'm just gonna jump all over the place, and I've got a couple notes here. So I think Claire led us in really beautifully. I think one of the first things here, and one of the big notes I've been giving clients in their content is when I've been editing, is taking a look at things like, this is great, this sounds great, this is really well written. How would you say this? How would your people say this? How do we get more of your tone and your people's voice, your people's words into this as well? Now this is not like ChatGPT specific. This is really great marketing specific. This is something we're always drilling into. But I think now more than ever, this is something we have to pay attention to and look at, where are the places this just sounds technically correct? Where are the places we're overly using industry lingo? Where are the places you sound like almost like too formal and smart? And how do you bring in more of your voice? And I wouldn't say you need to overly do this, but for some of you, it might actually be an exercise in how do you almost like try to overly bring in your voice and some of your mannerisms, characteristics, the way you speak, just to help create that balance, because a lot of times we think we're going too far, but it's actually just the right amount. But the other thing I'm really encouraging clients to think about is how, and this is not ChatGPT specific, this is great messaging and marketing specific, but I think now more than ever, we really want to look at this, is how are your people specifically thinking about this, specifically experiencing this, specifically talking about this? And I said specifically 3 times in a row for a reason. Specific sell, we know that, but I think ChatGPT, I think sometimes it makes our thinking a little lazy. And I think what ChatGPT does really well is it gives us content and it gives us things, but it tends to be a little bit more general, or it tends to be in more, unless you're teaching and spending time teaching ChatGPT what you want, right? And a little bit more like industry, like correct. But this is why there isn't a one-size-fits-all formula in business. This is why I have a job as a one-on-one coach. There's what's technically correct in business. There's what's technically correct in an industry. And then there's what's true and right for every single one of my clients and their business and their audience. And I can have 3 clients who have very similar businesses, if we just look at them from sort of the, in terms of like business model, what they offer, niche, that have 3 very different audiences with 3 very different things to speak to that are very specific to their people and very different than what someone else would say. And if we're not tapping into that, right, if we're just glossing and we're just speaking to the top level of content, this is always the case. This is not ChatGPT specific, right? We're just missing that opportunity to connect with our people in a way that has them understand why you specifically are the one they want to work with. And so this is always the work, but I think now more than ever, we want to be peeling the layers back. I was literally talking about this with a client earlier today. And this doesn't mean our content wasn't good, but the way it's going to stand out, the way it's going to draw more people in is peeling off the top level layer and getting one layer deeper into what are her people really experiencing? What are her people really thinking? What is she really experiencing? What is she really thinking? And how would she say that? And how would her people say that in the exact words they'd use? I think, let me just see if I can think of a good example here. Someone wants to put their one of their business topics in. I'm happy to riff on that, but I'll think about, so here, we could just be talking about this here, right? I could be talking about content and we could just be talking on a surface level about how your posts don't convert and what to, like, you need to bring in your voice more to have your content convert on a higher level. Okay, like I don't think that's wrong or bad. ChatGPT could come up with that. But I think it's very different than if I'm thinking about all of you and I'm like, who hasn't experienced that at the beginning of the year where you started posting stuff and you're like, what the fuck is going on? Why is my reach so down? Why is this not working the way it used to? I don't understand. Like, why is this not connecting with people? What do I need to do? What do I need to speak to? Like, why is this not landing? We're saying the same thing. And then if I give you those specific numbers or whatever that I share, but I'm like, hey, I went through this too. And what I had to do is really dig in and understand, like, what are the things I need to speak to and how can, like, I peel the layers back a little bit, right? Like, it's saying the same, sharing the same exact message. One is just very, like, surface level and just technically correct. The other is more the experience of in the way your people are experiencing and thinking about it and what they want on the other side. I don't know if that was actually the best example. But that's really what I'm seeing as a note that I'm giving a lot of clients. I'm like, tell me why this matters. Tell me how your people would say this. Tell me how your people are experiencing this. I want to hear less what is the concept of something, and more what is the experience of that concept. What is the way someone is feeling about this concept, right? Less how do we create content that converts, and more what is someone thinking about that? What does someone want from that? Let me know if this is making sense, if I'm describing this in a way. If not, I'll see if I can pull up another example. But I think that is one of the biggest pieces. And with this, again, bringing back those specifics, but also bringing back specific words your people and you use. So same client that I was looking at her sales emails, she had ChatGPT, I think, do like 10 subject lines, and they were all so textbook correct. They were so good. Like, they were such good subject lines, but all of them, I was like, none of these are like, they're not good. I mean, they're so technically good, but none of them sounded like her and had her spice and had the words she uses and has the language that she says that has people know it's her, right? Her special sauce. And none of it was what we know of her audience. Her audience is very specific, like all of your audiences. None of it was the stuff that we knew was going to really speak to her audience. It was just all really technically correct and very surface level, sort of like traditional, almost like bro marketing. I have no problem with bro marketing. I think a lot of bro marketing is actually very smart marketing, but more just like that sort of subject line heading. And that tends to not work as well with her audience. And that's because she knows her audience, and that's because she knows her people. And so I reflect this here because I think otherwise it's really easy, right, to have, thank you, Jennifer, for saying that, to have something that is so technically correct and to not understand why it's not working, especially if you are running it through ChatGPT. Right, to not understand why it's not working. But even if you aren't using ChatGPT, I definitely have content. I think one of the reasons my content couldn't getting as much reach at the beginning of the year, full transparency, we repurpose a lot of stuff. And I think I was repurposing stuff that was a couple years old that I think is good content. But I think it was good content that when I was in a different place in business where I just didn't know my audience to the degree I do now. I don't think I had the storytelling skills I do now. Like, I just hadn't gone that extra layer deep, and that is one of the things we've been playing with. I'm going to share the other thing I've done that I think has dramatic, like, I think that's like the thing that will blow content this year, and I'll share that in a couple minutes. But where was I going with this? I've done a lot of live trainings today, y'all. I did a training in someone's group and had calls, so my brain is like a little extra mush. So bear with me as I find the right words. But I think the piece we're talking about here is there's just something really interesting with how sometimes technically correct stuff, again, even if ChatGPT didn't do it, I think my past content technically was very correct. Technically, it was very good. Technically is how a piece of content should be written. But there's such a big difference in how we connect with people when we go one layer deeper, and when we bring in our voice, and when we use other people's voice, and we just bring in some more of that nuance. That's even without bringing in storytelling. I think it changes the game. And it's sort of like the difference between exciting and boring content in many ways. I do think you can train ChatGPT to do quite a bit. I personally don't use ChatGPT that way, but I do think for those of you who want to, you can feed ChatGPT some of the things you wanted to learn about your voice and kind of hone it to do that. That's the first note that, again, even if it weren't for ChatGPT, I would be giving this note to clients, but particularly right now, I'm really looking at clients' content. Like, the second I'm like, did they have ChatGPT write this and then have me edit it? The second my brain goes that, I'm like, oh, we've got to like bring in some of their personal spice, and we've got to take this one layer deeper. Otherwise, if I'm thinking that, you better believe everybody else who's reading it is thinking that as well. So with that, so again, that's thinking about what's your voice, what's your audience's voice. And when you think about your audience's voice, it's the cheat sheet there that I always play with, is like literally what are your clients or ideal clients or audience thinking? How are they experiencing this? And I always think about, I think we did this on the podcast once, but I always like to think about when your audience isn't being filtered, when they're not trying to give you the correct answer, if they've had a cocktail, maybe they've had a cocktail too many, or when they're exhausted, or right before they go to bed, how are they thinking about and talking about whatever your subject is? Those are the words we want to use, right? I don't think any one of us goes to bed and is like, how do I get my content to convert better, right? Like, I don't know about any of you, but that's literally not how I think. I don't I don't really drink anymore, but if I did, right, I wouldn't be talking to my husband thinking, I'm really interested in thinking about how I could have better conversions from my content on social media and how I can use that to bring in more ideal clients. Right, like I said with love, like no one talks that way. And so I think Claire says, I agree with you so much. Love you for that. So I think just seeing, we all do this. I'm sure I have content, right? Sometimes I'm a little lazier than other times where I probably am just speaking to the surface level words that are technically correct. But we always just want to keep going back to like, how is someone actually saying, I want my content to convert better? It's probably more along the lines of why the fuck, like what the fuck is going on here? Why isn't this working the way it used to? I don't understand why so-and-so is getting so much visibility. I don't even think their content's that good. And I just poured a bunch of time and energy into this. Why the heck is this not getting reach? Why is this not working the way it used to? I like literally don't know what I need to do to change this. And maybe it's not that, but right, doesn't that feel so much more like what someone would be thinking than how do I get my content to convert to bring in ideal clients? So that's what I'm talking about here. Literally, how can you think about how are your people thinking about this and bring in that tonality and that voice and their actual language? It's going to make such a difference in how your content connects. And pretty sure that ChatGPT, unless you're really training it, doesn't know that. Jennifer says, thank you, Kim. I have to go to a coaching session. I'll watch the rest on replay. Oh, we will be here for the replay, and you can share any questions on the replay as well. Nice to have you, though, and nice to see you. So the next piece here is, and then with this, I think this is obvious, and I won't go too far into this, but I would just really check with where are you using generic lingo and industry lingo. I think that is, again, it's just easy for us all to do, ChatGPT or not, and just really being mindful of that because ChatGPT or not, unless your audience are literally in the same industry and use that lingo, I think we want to be always mindful of this, especially right now, because those tend to be words that mean nothing otherwise to your people. And then also really checking in for like, where do we have the fluffy in specific language? Is in specific a term? I think, again, this is an always thing with your content and with your marketing, with your messaging, but I think with ChatGPT, and with things feeling a little more general, the more general and the more fluffy and the more lingoed something is, the less it's going to sound like you and the less it's going to be specific to your people and their pain points and what they want. And so the opportunity is looking like, where do we have some of that fluffy language? Where are we talking about things in generalizations or in lingo and words that mean kind of nothing to your people? How can we drill into those specific examples, experiences that's always going to have your content stand out more? Now, here is the thing that I have seen that I've been testing. And again, beginning of the year, I was like, and I was pretty neutral about it, but I was like, oh, this is so interesting. Like what changed with our content? And then I have just been treating my content like a little science experiment all year long and testing and just really focusing on messaging. And we did a masterclass on storytelling and just sort of like what's working better than other things. And that's where we've seen some, on average, again, between over a 1,000 to 2,000% increase in reach. Engagement on Instagram, it's been really interesting seeing the reach on the back end, like the number of saves and the number of shares. And the number one thing I'm seeing, and this is my prediction, I don't have a crystal ball, I could be totally wrong, but this is my prediction. So, if I'm right, give me credit for it. If not, it's still not going to hurt your content. This is still a good strategy, so that's all good too. But my prediction in terms of, because of ChatGPT, because of the lack of trust in our space, because of the saturation, my prediction is content that has personal stories, so not just storytelling in general, but personal stories and vulnerability is going to blow up like never before. Now again, these are just good content strategies anyway. Sharing personal stories, sharing vulnerability, even if I'm wrong, it's not going to hurt your content. But Laura says, haha, love the voices, and thank you for this topic so much here. I'm a little cracked out today, Laura, so you'll have to bear with all my voices. But I think this is something here, again, whether my prediction is correct or not, these are two pieces that are just always going to serve you in content. But I've really seen in my business, I've seen in quite a few of my clients as well, where we've been testing some of these things and they've been implementing. When you bring in the personalization and the personal stories and examples, the masterclass, I think, for strategic stories that sell, I think it's still in the group. So we talked a little bit more about bringing in storytelling to your content. This is again taking a step further and bringing in personal stories to you. And then with that, being willing to be vulnerable and being willing to share the things that other people aren't willing to share, and being willing to expose parts of yourself that are valuable and helpful to your audience, to help them feel connected to you, understand why you're good at what you do, or why you can support them, again, has always been something that works. I think, though, that is something ChatGPT cannot recreate, right? Unless you literally give it all of that. That is something no one else can create. That is something that I don't know if I get copied a lot, but I've seen a lot of my versions of my content in the online space by other people, right? But the one thing I never have to worry about is I know if I'm bringing in my personal story and my vulnerability and my personal journey and experience, no one can copy that, right? So even if we're not talking about ChatGPT, but what does ChatGPT do? It is aggregating everybody's content that we're putting in there, right? Like that's why it all starts to sound the same. No one can take that from you. And I also think because of that, what builds connection, right? Who knows some Brene Brown, right? Vulnerability, like that is what connects us with humans. And so what are we trying to do with content? We're trying to build connection. We're trying to build know, like, and trust. How do we build know, like, and trust, right? We bare our souls a little bit. If I'm not looking at content, I'm thinking about relationships offline. If I think about my husband, we just celebrated our anniversary, what is one of the reasons he's my husband over someone else who technically on paper has the right qualities? We were vulnerable on date one where we were weirdos and stared in each other's eyes for 6 hours. Real story. We're intimate. We are vulnerable with one another in so many different ways. So we have a really deep connection and bond over someone else who might technically on paper be similar to my husband. They've got nothing on him, right? They could make 45 carbon copies of him, put them in front of me, and it wouldn't matter because all day, every day, I have the connection with the human who's been vulnerable with me and who's shared parts of themselves with me. And the same thing is true for us in our marketing and in our content. Claire says, so cute. I love this. Well, I want to read the rest of these. I just got off on a little rant and I'm coming back to these comments. So I have a thought on vulnerability because I think we can also use vulnerability in a really not great way. And this does not mean everybody needs to bare their soul. But I really, truly think this is the part this is what's going to blow. This was always what will blow up your content, but I think specifically because of AI and because we have trust issues in the online space, what's the way to build some trust is to let ourselves be exposed a little bit. What's the way to build some trust with people is to show parts of ourselves that maybe we wouldn't have otherwise, right? To take ourselves off of the how can I just be shiny and polished and have ChatGPT technically do this correctly, and instead share parts of me. And even it doesn't all have to be deep, dark, twisty vulnerability, but I think just even sharing personal stories. And I've just noticed when I share content, it is wild to me how I can share the same piece of content, but if I just bring in a little bit of my personal experience, my personal story, how differently that performs. And I think it's for these exact reasons. And if I'm honest with myself, what content do I want to read? I could care less if someone gives me the technical things on how a piece of content is going to perform. I'm yeah, okay, that's great, that's helpful. Or even, I might even read that, but I'm just going to read that and be oh, that's a cool strategy for me to try. I'm not necessarily even going to remember whose post that was and if I want to pay attention to them. But if someone even shares something personal about how they use that in their business or how it's supported them or what they're how they use this to overcome a hurdle in their business, not only am I getting the value from that, but suddenly I have a connection with the person in front of me and they're the person I want to learn more from. All right, let me read these comments and then I've got some more thoughts on this. Claire says, so co-sign this. Oh, hopefully I didn't lose any comments. I forgot that it does that. Laura says, you're onto something with the vulnerability and personal stories. I'd put money on that bet. Thank you. We'll see. Everybody's content just sounds the same otherwise, and it's refreshing when I connect with something as I'm scrolling, and I'm more than ever aware when I actually pause and read, watch. Yes, it's so true. And I think it's so interesting to, I don't know, be interested to hear what you think about this, Laura, but I was talking about this with a client earlier. I think often when we post something vulnerable and it feels like we have a vulnerability hangover and it feels so oh my God, I cannot believe I shared that. And for me, what I have found are two things. One, usually that's how I know I've actually gotten enough layers down where it's worth sharing. Not that other content isn't worth it. I think sometimes we just have filler content to have touch points, but I feel sort of when I hit that part of is it okay for me to share this? That's when I know it's the good thing to share. But the other thing I found is well, I guess there's three things here, is most of the time the stuff I think is super vulnerable on the other side, no one's like, oh, that was super vulnerable. It's just because it touches on something for me. But I've also found when it touches on something for me, what's personal is universal. And so like that literally is that thing where we can like have that connection point with someone. So they're like, oh my gosh, yes, me too. I so get that. Okay, I just realized, let's see, real-time comments. I'm just losing comments and I'm going to see if I can pull these back up. And why does it do this? I need to, okay, I can see them here. Okay, so let's see. Claire says, love this, Kim, so cute. 100%. I love reading and hearing your stories and analogies. Oh, I love you for saying that. Thank you. She said, I cried in a podcast interview the other day and I still have a hangover from it. It's not gone yet. Yes. Yes. I think it's just so true and so real. And I think it's really important to normalize that as well, because I think we feel that and then we think we've done maybe something wrong or we've gone too far. But I think it's just the part of us that wants to protect our truth. And I mean, we could have a whole live stream around that, right? Like, why do we hold our vulnerability and why do we hold our personal stories in? Because it feels safer, because we're worried about being judged, because we want to people please. If you've been bullied in the past, right? Like, I mean, I think there's so many pieces to that. Because we're worried that we're going to shine so bright, we're going to dim other people's light. I think there's so many reasons we just, it's a form of hiding in plain sight, in a way that we dim our light, in a way that we shrink back. So I think to normalize for everyone, that is true. And that's why we put the layers on top of content. That's why we want to be technically perfect. That's why we want to have the surface level stuff, because it feels like this is the correct, safe way to share something. And then when we peel that back, and like Claire said, we're a little bit more vulnerable and we share a little bit more, it does expose us. It does open us up. It does say like, hey, here I am. You can judge me. You can tell me what you think about me, right? It just opens us up, I think, for rejection on a very personal level instead of on a safe feeling surface level. So just to normalize, I think it is such a real feeling and experience. Claire says the stories of how unprofessional I may sound and did I give enough nuance, etc. See, and I think that's just so, like, everyone's got a different thing here, right? Like, I think that is, I'll share my version of that, Claire, in a second. It's an ongoing journey of vulnerability in the public domain. I think it's so true. So I shared on Instagram stories. I don't know how many of you follow me there, but one of my best friends sent me a photo from like 11 years ago. And it's 11 years ago, Kim, pre lots of therapy, pre lots of coaching, pre lots of personal development work, pre everything we talk about in this group, and creating a new identity and stepping into that. That was the version of me that did not really like herself that much. And I'm like sitting there smoking a Cuban cigar, thinking I'm so badass and cool, and like clearly not. And I wrote a little post around that, just in terms of like this was me, and this is the evidence that mindset works. Like, if you didn't believe mindset worked and that you can retrain your brain, like, take this as evidence that you can, and you can step into a new identity and become someone new. It wasn't even super vulnerable, right? Like, the picture is vulnerable, but it's not like I shared all of the specifics or all of the trauma or all of the things that I was going through at that time, or what I was doing that night or anything like that. But it felt, just to what Claire was speaking, there's a part of me, like, the reason I knew it was the right thing to post is there was a part of me that thought, can I really post this? What are people going to think? Will they think I'm unprofessional? Will they think I'm a good coach? Will they think I'm good at business? Like, will they, what, everything that Claire is speaking to here. But, and the reason I'm sharing this is not only to normalize it, but that for me is also how I know this is the exact right thing to share. As soon as I have those question marks, I'm like, ding, ding, ding. This means I've gone just a layer enough that I should share this. And the reason I share that is because I think with vulnerability, where we get things a little twisted is we hear this and then we can almost have the pendulum go too far. So on the one end, it's like, how do we bury all the personal stories and the vulnerability and just have things technically correct and just talk to the surface level topic, right? So the surface level topic being bring in your voice to your content, right? Like, I could just talk about bringing in your voice in your client's words, and we could just call it at that instead of sharing the details we are here, right? So that's one end of the extreme. But the end of the extreme is, oh great, I'm supposed to be vulnerable. How do I go all the way into and like drudge up all of my personal stuff, all of my deep, dark, twisty secrets, everything I've ever worked through, everything that's ever been hard, everything that is like, I am just in, like, basically naked on the internet. And I think when we've gone that far, I think either extreme doesn't serve us in content. I think there's this middle ground in which, how are we peeling enough layers back, but also how have we processed enough of the vulnerability we're sharing and mind it for what's the lesson out of that vulnerability? What's the connection point? What is the reason for sharing this? Because the truth is, we're still running businesses. The truth is, we are still here to be of service. The truth is, we're still here to help people solve problems, get desires met, not to use the online space as a journal, right? Not to just try to get connection. The truth is, I think we can be overly vulnerable, and I think it can be in some ways harmful to your marketing, to your content, and break and sever some trust. And I know no one wants, like, I know we don't want to hear that, but I do think that in some ways that can be the case. And so I think there's this way of understanding what is, like, how are we noticing those two extremes and seeing neither one really serves our marketing. And with ChatGPT, right, we want to be extra mindful and AI and how crowded it is, like extra mindful not to be so superficial and so surface level. But I think also having that responsibility as a CEO, as a service provider, being really mindful of what we're sharing vulnerably, that it's still serving a purpose, that it's still in service of our audience. When I showed that picture, right, it hit just enough of like, can I share this? But there was enough of me that's like, of course I can. And also, this is so in service of me wanting to tell people, oh my gosh, if you're feeling like you can't change and like you're never gonna get what you want, like, let me give you some evidence that you can. And I've been there, and like, this is so possible. And I'm not, like, I love past Kim. I'm not embarrassed about her, but also like, we are two vastly different people, right? I clearly was like not needing to process that anymore, not in any of that, and clearly had something I wanted to share. And so with the personal stories and with the vulnerability, I do think this is what will blow up your content in 2023. But I think just understanding and finding that balance. And with that, because I know we are all a bunch of high achievers and recovering perfectionists in this group, this does not mean now overthink it and get super perfectionistic-y around it. It's just being mindful of that swing. And with the vulnerability side of things, just checking in with, like, I usually just check in with, why am I sharing this? Like, have I already processed this? Is there like a lesson or message around this? If I'm not fully processed around this, am I really clear as to why I'm sharing this? Am I sharing this to try to get attention or approval or soothing? If so, probably for my journal. Am I sharing this because I'm super neutral outside of the maybe like, can I share this part, but like super neutral, and because this is a part of my message. This takes what I want to teach a layer deeper. This is something I want my audience to know and understand. Great. That's a great vulnerability edge to lean into. And the other, Claire says it's an ongoing journey of vulnerability in the public domain. I think for all of us. The other thought that comes up for me here, and I think this is also important to say, yes to personal stories and yes to vulnerability. And I think this is my coach who always says this. She's like, Kim, you don't owe anyone shit. And what I will borrow from Lacey's sites, and I'll reflect this to all of you. Y'all also don't owe anyone shit. And so, yes, this is the note I'm giving clients. Yes, I'm encouraging them to bring in more personalization and more vulnerability and more of their voice and more of their client's voice and more of those specifics. And you do not owe anyone shit in terms of your personal story and vulnerability. There is a lot I will probably never share in content because, frankly, it's not relevant. And also, I don't owe anyone those parts of my life and story on the internet. And there's a huge chasm between those topics and this world of personal story and vulnerability and things I can share that I do feel like in some ways I owe my audience, and I feel like I do in some ways as a service provider feel like I owe my people, because it's the work I do and what I'm here and committed to helping people with. And so that's what I would play with. I would just remember, like, if there's something personal, you don't owe, like, this is not to now say you have to share everything personal that you don't want to, but I do think we can play with, and within the scope of your work, within the scope of what you're committed to doing, where is our responsibility to share a little bit more of ourselves to support our people? So hopefully that nuance makes, or that like difference makes sense. Totally feel that too, Kim. Claire says yes. Okay, let me just see here, because I had another piece I want to talk about. Otherwise, we'll talk about vulnerability non-stop. But if anyone has a question or wants clarification on that too, let me know. Seeing if there was anything else I wanted to share on that. With the personal stories too, and maybe this is helpful to hear. I think, we can go with like what I just talked about and what Claire was talking about in terms of personal stories. But I think this can also be very simple. If you're an OBM, for example, right? It might be the personal story about the reason that you love supporting clients on the back end of their business is because of the time that everything was super disorganized and broke on the back end of your business and how this had you fall in love with systems and processes. I'm totally making this up, right? But that might be a personal story and something that feels a little vulnerable to share. It doesn't have to be, again, something like super, super deep. Sometimes it's just like, what's the personal story you had in terms of what got you results, what didn't get you results, what you tried that didn't work, what your thought process was, what didn't feel good, what did feel good, right? I don't, what do we just have on the, no, it's coming up this week, well, in a couple weeks. This is like a silly example, but one of the questions I got for the podcast was around using Facebook ads. And I just shared a personal story about a course I took recently, and like how I was thinking about taking Facebook ads, right? There's nothing super deep and vulnerable around that, but it's vulnerable in terms of, or it's personal in terms of, I have a personal story and example around this, and I have some personal experience around this, and it's something that AI literally just can't feed me as how to teach around or how to talk around this topic, and be vulnerable just in terms of, it's a peek into what I do behind the scenes that other people wouldn't know about. So I think just remembering these can still be like very, in air quotes, surface level personal stories and vulnerabilities that are still going to allow you to be so connected. And I think just sometimes that word can get us a little twisted, and I don't want anyone to make this harder than it needs to be, and to see there are those personal stories in everything you're doing, but just weaving those in, or it's going to help you bring in your voice, but it's also just going to help your content be specific to you and create those connection points so people get why you're the one for them versus someone else who, like, you might both technically do the same thing, but you have a slightly different approach. You have a slightly different thing that connects with them on a deeper level. Okay, so how I think about using AI, we're going to talk about that, and then just a really quick thought on the type of content that converts that I just want to remind everyone. So real quickly here, because I think this is helpful, because we've been talking about ChatGPT and AI quite a bit. Y'all do you. Like, everyone use ChatGPT. Like, I think there's so much usage there, so I'm by no means an expert on ChatGPT, but I thought I would share my thought process around how I use this. I personally don't use ChatGPT for my content, but that's also because, literally what I was telling y'all today, I've been so deeply this year more entrenched in tinkering with, playing with, enjoying creating content, but also, I don't know if growth hacking is the right word. More like it's just been an experiment this year where I'm like, I just want to see what works differently and better. But the only way I really know how to do that is to be in it myself. So that's one of the reasons I'm not running as much through ChatGPT, and maybe in another season we will more. But because we do definitely use ChatGPT, the way, if I was using ChatGPT for content, the way I would be thinking about it is really thinking about it like an additional team member in my business. And if I was having someone, in the past, we've had a copywriter who's repurposed content for us, and when I have a copywriter repurposing content for me, and again, the only reason we don't right now is literally I was just telling you, like, I just like want to be in the trenches with it a little bit. But one of the things I always think about is how can I have a team member take something to 70% or 80% for me, never ever expecting them to bring it to 100%. So that I can have this mostly done. So I'm taking the heavy lifting off my plate. So I'm taking all the extra thinking off my plate, but then I can take it across the finish line the rest of the way, that I can then infuse it with my word, with my personal story, with my little touch here, with the little thing that I know my clients are thinking that I don't expect someone else or AI to know. So that's really the way I think about, if you're going to use ChatGPT to actually content create, I would really think about how can you use it to basically get you a really good portion of the way there, and then not then throw it out, but then how can you use that as the bones that you're going to kind of put a little bit of your personal touch and magic into it. And then I think it's also really great for, and this is a whole different live stream, and again, not what I'm an expert in, but I think it's really great too for, sometimes I'll put things in and like, hey, write me 3 variations of this, or give me some ideas around this topic, or hey, here are 10 titles or subject lines, make this more SEO friendly, or how would this, which one do you think will have a better, if my audience is X, Y, and Z, what do you think will have a better open rate? So I think playing with it that way, or putting in a piece of content, asking it to create the carousel post for you. I think there's a lot of great ways where you can also have it do more of the sort of like strategy after the fact with a piece of content. But I think just understanding that, so you're not, I think what happens in the content we see that maybe isn't landing as well, we're just like, that's obviously ChatGPT. I think that's when it's sort of like we're just giving all of our power away to ChatGPT and expecting it to do all of it for us. But even if you have team, right? We're never expecting team to just 100% do, I mean, even if we're obviously wanting to delegate and let go of the work, right? We still have to lead our team. We still have to delegate to our team. We still have to tell them what we want. And there's still going to be certain parts of our work that we're going to need to put finishing touches or put ourselves into. So that's the way, real quickly, because I thought maybe that would be helpful, the way I think about currently using AI in my business. And who knows, that might change. I mean, it might be able to cook us food in a year. Like I'm like fascinated by, slightly terrified and fascinated by the technology. So we will see what that might change completely. We might be able to give it 90%, but I think this is just currently with our current iteration, the way I like to play with that. And then I'm also, I guess the other thought I have is that I'm also aware that I can't expect ChatGPT or a team member to give me my own thought leadership. And I think that is the piece with personal stories and with vulnerability. And I think thought leadership content's always really valuable. I can ask for ideas that I put my thought leadership into. I can share some of my thought leadership and ask for support crafting that. But your thought leadership, right? Like that's the other kind of content that I think will blow up. And I think that is part of the vulnerability and personal stories. I think that has to come from you, otherwise it's not thought leadership. So I am not against using team members or delegating or ChatGPT or anything like that, but I think just being aware of how those types of support can best support you and function, and just understanding where our role comes in can make them just that much more valuable as a tool, as an asset for us. Let's see if there's, okay. The last piece here, I just want to touch on really quickly because I think this is just helpful to remember. I feel like what happened this year, and maybe this is just what I've seen with clients, but I feel like this year has just been, I wrote a post recently, like this year has been special. I've just been witness to it because I only do one-on-one work from my clients in so many different ways. And I think some clients have literally barely been affected and other clients have really been affected depending what space they're in. But I think between the economy changes, the influx of how crowded it's been, the what was I going to say here? The lack of trust after we've just had some people here very shady in our space, and what we're talking about here with things like AI and algorithm changes. I've just really seen some of my clients just get a little bit more, I guess, jacked up around their content in a way that maybe they haven't in the past. And something we have conversations around, I just want to bring here is just remembering a couple of things. One, I had one of my clients do this. I just made her go back to where her last couple of clients had come from. And it was really fascinating because she realized it was like 20% of her clients came from social media. And it doesn't mean we're going to stop caring about content or stop caring about social media, but it was just such a helpful, like, anchor point for her to see that all of this stress she was manufacturing was about something that had 20% impact on her results and revenue. And I think that's just something we sometimes forget. Like I think my content helps bring in clients for me and revenue for me, but it's like my social media posts, for example, they're one very, 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 very small part of what brings in clients in my business. If that's all I was relying on, honestly, I probably should be worried this year. Do you know what I mean? Like it's one very small sliver. And the other thing I really think is important to remember is understanding what your current goals in your business are with your content. We did the live stream, the training, the Path to Consistent 10K months is still up until the 11th. So we talked about this more in depth there. But I think with content, we sometimes forget what our current focus on. Are we trying to increase our reach and get in front of new people to start new relationships? Are we trying to nurture people? Are we trying to bring in leads and sales, right? What is our actual sales goal? What are we actually trying to do with each piece of content? And understanding them because of whatever that goal with a piece of content is. And if you don't know, right, it's kind of not fair to judge how a post is performing or how a piece of content is performing. And I will say this until my face turns blue, no business, no launch is made or broken by a single piece of content or even a week of content. And that being said, if we don't know the goal of content, right, it's sort of like hard to even gauge if it's working well or not. And I'm just going to give an example here. So I had a reel, and let's say one of my recent reels, let's say the reach was 1,200 people, right? It could seem, and the reel before that was like 340 or something like that, right? It'd be really easy to be like, oh, that reel that had a reach of 1,200 was better and performed better than the reel that had a lower reach. And it's like, well, maybe or maybe not. But like, what was my actual current goal and what was actually happening with those posts? And if we take a closer look at my reel that had more reach, and if I take an actual look at the stats, I can see it's like 90% of those people are not in my audience. And if I take a look at that reel that has lower reach, right, it's like 80% of those people are in my audience. And what this suddenly tells me is, okay, so that post with a ton of reach, that's good if my goal is to get in front of new people and grow my audience. And that's also great if it's actually getting in front of the right fucking people to grow my audience. And if that reel had a little bit more reach because I picked a trending audio that may or may not be attracting my people, like that's great. I'm not mad at it. Like we'll take some people, but right, it's very easy to make it seem like that post is somehow better versus that other reel that had far lower reach that got in front of far more of my audience that are the right types of people for my work that I'm nurturing. And then if that leads to someone saving it on the back end or booking a call with me, right? Even though it technically doesn't look like it performed as well, if that's my goal and that's what that post is doing, it is actually performing far better. And so I think just remembering things like this, I think there's a need for a combination of both, right? We do need to get visible in front of new people and start new relationships. We do need to nurture the people in front of us. We do also need to sell. Remember, I tell clients this all the time. If you're making a sales post, you're probably going to have very little public engagement, not because your post isn't good and not because you're selling and people don't like to engage with sales posts, but because your call to action is literally telling people to take an action that takes them off of your post, right? Whereas if you have a post that tells someone to take an action, to leave a comment, right, you're probably going to get more engagement. Is one post better than the other? No, they literally serve different functions in your sales process. And if your goal was to have as many people land on your landing page as possible, I would argue the less engagement, but the post that tells people to go to that landing page and drives traffic to that landing page is a better performing post for you. So I think just remembering these things, because we just, especially I think with the extra noise this year, I think everyone's just also a little almost like, I feel like perfectionism is flaring up and the worry that everyone's doing things right or wrong. And I think sometimes it's just really easy to lose the plot in business and with content. And so I wanted to close with that because I both want you to hear like, hey, these are the things I'm paying attention to. These are the things I'm saying to my clients in terms of some adjustments to make to your content, and let's just be super mindful. We don't all use this as an excuse to now go sort of like lose our minds, going extra crazy, refining content, getting super perfectionistic, thinking, oh my gosh, everything has to be super personal, everything has to be super vulnerable, or if it's not getting X number of reach or likes or something like that, it's not working. And really remembering what actually drives sales in your business, right? How much of it is even coming directly from your posts? Again, not to say that they don't matter. I think they absolutely serve a purpose. But if I look at where my last handful of clients came from, none of them directly came from a social media post that I can think of. And I also know that people will reference when they hire me, hey, this post really spoke to me, this post really spoke to me. And guess what? The posts that really spoke to them are the personal ones, the vulnerable ones, and they're not always the ones with the most likes or the most comments, right? Sometimes it's the post. I personally care way more about reach on the back end of a post, reach, especially on Instagram, because you can see that more on social media. In my Facebook group, I can see reach. But on Instagram, I care so much more about how many times is my post being saved, is it being shared, and what is that reach, than I do visible likes, because I know my audience tends to not visibly engage as much. I think in the Facebook group, y'all talk a lot more here than you do on Instagram. But I know that the majority of my clients don't comment on my content. Maybe they do after they hire me, but I don't know how many people have commented on my post before hiring me. Like, that's just not a behavior I see in my people. So just reflecting this here again as a reminder, because I think it's just easy when you're in the day-to-day of your business, especially if you don't have someone to lovingly remind you of these things, to get it a little twisted, or to start focusing on the wrong things, or to start looking at something and thinking that it means your content isn't working when it might be working far better than you think it does. So just a friendly, loving reminder on that, a reminder to take all of this lightly as a fun experiment, not as something that needs to be super heavy. but also to treat it like an experiment in your business, because this is what I'm seeing true in my business and through my clients. It may or may not be true in your business. And I need one sip of water real quickly. All the teaching today, my throat is like, I'm not used to talking this much, but it's just the same reason that the ChatGPT is good, but not perfect for everyone, right? There is not a one size fits all formula. What's true for my business, what's true for a client's business might not be true for yours. So also just taking this with a grain of salt. And then I would really invite all of you just to get back to getting clear on, where do your clients, where does your money actually come from? What drives that? I would still absolutely be putting out content for variable reasons. This is the actual last thing I'll say is sharing this with the client who 20% of her clients come from social media. And she was sort of like, well, what's the point? Should I even be posting? I was like, well, I think we have to also remember, you might meet a client at a workshop or somewhere else, right? But what do we all do? Even if the majority of your clients aren't coming from your content and social media, what do we all do before we're going to hire someone? I don't know, maybe I'm the only one, but I go look them up on social media. I go binge a bunch of their content. I go silently stalk them. I mean, like, who does not do that? And then I want to hear Claire's comment. Like, I don't know any of us who don't do that. And so I think we have to remember, even if your main source for bringing in clients isn't necessarily social media or content, I think it still serves a purpose, and it's still one of the best vehicles for all of us, especially for those of you who are having thought leadership, and delivering value before you ask for a sale is an important part of what you do. So for my coaches, I think if you're maybe I think as a designer, you want to be able to showcase your work, but I think there's certain people in this group, like if you're an OBM or a VA, I think this is maybe less necessary for you, but especially for my coaches, I think just seeing, like, it's such a great platform for you to share your thought leadership, who you are, what you're about, what your approach is like, as well as to showcase, what's the thing that I'm thinking of? Oh, share value before you ask for the sale. So, but I think even if that's not your main lead gen source, people absolutely look that stuff up before hiring you. So I think just remembering that, so we're not making that wrong either. Claire says, same, my people rarely comment unless in a challenge. Yeah, I think it's just so interesting to notice. And I think, Claire, I don't know about you, but I just noticed such a difference too between Facebook and Instagram. And it's just like good to know. And Claire says, yep, 100%. It's never one thing. It's all of them combined that yields the sustainable results, 1,000%. And I think we just have to remember that it's not one post ever, but it's also like all these different pieces. We talked about this in the masterclass the other week, right? When a client comes to me, it's not like rarely, every once in a while, I have someone who sees a post and then they book a call with me and then they hire me. But, and here is the big but, I've shared this before, the people that see one post and get on a call and hire me, it would be so easy for me to say, that's because that content was so great, and that's why I booked a client off of one post. But here's the truth. They saw that post and somebody spoke to them and they booked a call. And then what do they do between booking that call and getting on the call with me? They probably went to my website, where there are literally hundreds of videos and podcast episodes and blog posts. Or they went to this Facebook group, right, and binged a bunch of videos. Or they went to my Instagram account and binged a bunch of content. And so it's one post, and then likely between that time and the time they get on the phone with me, they've usually consumed and just shortened the timeline of like how much time we've had to build a relationship. They've usually consumed a lot to get to know me. So I think, again, it's never one thing, but what I see traditionally with most of the people who hire me, this is going to be the truth for most of you, right? We have a customer journey, and there are just all these variable touch points that are just stacking on top of each other, the same way for any relationship, the same way for my husband, right? We have the relationship we do today because we first had a first date. And we just like all of these different touch points that led to us finally having a relationship to get married. Okay, I'm gonna go off on like 5 tangents because I'm also a little slap happy today. Claire says, yes, definitely such a great reminder. Thank you so much. So just remember that with your content. And again, I would just check in with whenever you're looking at those stats. Look at your metrics. I think it's so helpful, and so helpful if you're wanting to growth hack a little bit. Like I find that helpful for me to also be like, oh, why did this one perform differently than that one? Like, was it a trending audio? Was it the caption we use? If we use a hook, like how does a hook work versus a quote? I know for my audience, like, I'm always surprised where it's like, oh, this hook worked better. Like, I would have thought this one would have been the one. Like, I pay attention to those things, right? This is also how we increase our performance with content. I think it's really helpful to look at those things, but I think hold it all lightly. Treat it as an experiment. Your audience will also surprise you half the time. I was sure my post about what I've learned in my content, I was sure that was going to be the one that did the best this week. It's like the one that did the worst. You know what I mean? So I think also know we test things and then be willing to be wrong, but just to keep using that information so that you can just keep evolving with your content and taking that neutral lens at it can be very helpful. But also just to be mindful of not seeing a specific statistic and suddenly making that mean you stop where it's not working, because it's rarely the full picture or full story. All right, y'all. I love this conversation. I love you all so much. I am going to go get ready for my spin class, but we will pick a winner for the content that stands out course. And then a reminder, if you signed up for the masterclass, The Path to Consistent 10K Months, that is still live through October 11th, and we're pulling that down. I do think we're going to turn it into an evergreen opt-in, but it'll take us a couple of weeks for that. If you sign up for that, well, even if you didn't sign up for that, we are offering $250 off a coaching intensive or the first month of my 6-month coaching program with me if you book your consultation by October 11th and book a spot for any of my availability through the end of the year. I am not saying this to try to create false urgency. I'm just saying this transparently. I have limited availability through the end of the year, and I've had quite a few calls, more than I expected, book in. So if that's something you're interested in, I invite you to book a call sooner rather than later. I might get a wild hair and open up an extra intensive, but it's also the holidays, so I might not want to. So just fair warning, but if you book your consultation by the 11th, and if anything, just leave me a note in the consultation that you want me to honor that special, I will honor that special. So even if there's not an opening for till the next week, that's fine. You just have to get it in booked by the 11th. It could be for October 20th or something like that, but just leave me a note. And that is valid on a Unapologetic Words That Sell coaching intensive. So if you want to take more of a look at what we're talking about today, but taking and drilling into the specific messaging and content strategy, and not so much where are you going to post every day, but more understanding how are we positioning your content and how are we having you show up, yes, to own your words that sell unapologetically and to own your work, but how are we peeling those layers back enough to have you showing up in a way that really connects with your people and has your content stand out and has your content bring in those people who are I want to work with you. That is one of my strengths. I'm really good at it. Not to pat myself on the back, but also it's what I'm really good at. And then obviously my 6-month coaching partnership, you cannot get rid of me. And we look at the whole strategy for you in terms of how we're building out a really reliable process for you that's specific to your business to create a customer journey and to fill it with those right fit leads and to teach you how to know how to turn them into right fit clients, and then all the mindset that gets wrapped around that. So you're learning how to think like a CEO and show up to run your business like a business so that you can make that reliable and reoccurring revenue in your business, whether that's 10K months or 100K months. Whatever, we're all looking for different things. That's what that is there for. So I'll drop a discovery call link for y'all below. Let's just see here. Laura says, awesome. Thanks, Kim. P.S. I'm so here for your real human tangents and voices. XOXO. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for saying that. That way I won't have a vulnerability hangover. So I appreciate you. I love you so much. Love you all so much. Thank you for being here. And I will be back next week and we'll hang then. Bye, y'all.